They called him a barbarian, a storm from the east, but they never saw the truth behind his eyes. A boy who lost everything, a son who watched his family torn apart, and a man who swore that no one would ever break him again. From the ashes of betrayal he rose, not for greed, not for gold, but for vengeance and destiny. This is the story of Genghis Khan, the man who turned pain into power and built an empire that would shake the world. Before we begin, subscribe and join us on this journey through history's untold legends, where every scar tells a story and every story hides a lesson. The wind howled over the endless steppes. The sun fell behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. In a small Mongol encampment, a boy named Temujin watched his father, Yesuje, a respected tribal leader, speak of honor, unity, and family. Temujin's heart was full of admiration, unaware that the world he knew was about to collapse. His father carried the pride of his bloodline, a man who believed loyalty was sacred. But in a world where tribes betrayed each other for survival, loyalty was fragile as dust in the wind. One night, during a peace visit to a rival tribe, Yesuje was poisoned. The news struck like thunder. Temujin's father, his strength, his protector, his teacher, was gone. The tribe that had once sworn allegiance to him turned away instantly. They saw the family of the dead as weak, a burden too heavy to carry. The boy who was born into honor was suddenly cast into the wilderness, stripped of every comfort. His mother wept, holding her children close as the tribe rode away, leaving behind only ashes and silence. In the freezing nights that followed, Temujin's family survived on roots, scraps, and hope. The boy's hands grew calloused from digging in the frozen earth for food. He watched his mother's tears dry, replaced by fierce determination. She told her children, "We will not die forgotten." Her words lit something inside him, a flame that no cold could extinguish. Every sunrise became a battle, every breath a victory. The wilderness tried to break them, but it only hardened their spirit. Temujin learned quickly that the world showed mercy to no one. When rival tribes raided their camp, they stole what little they had, even taking his older half-brother as a captive. The boy's heart filled with pain, but also with understanding. He began to see that fear ruled men, and betrayal was the weapon of the weak. He swore that one day, when he had the power, he would build a life where betrayal could no longer destroy families like his. The death of his father became more than grief. It became the center of his destiny. Every hardship, every hunger pang, every wound etched into his body became part of a single vow. He would avenge the injustice that had torn his family apart. But his vengeance was not a child's fantasy of blood. It was quiet, steady, and patient, the kind of vengeance that waits, learns, and strikes when the time is right. Years passed, and the boy grew into a young man. He learned to ride faster than the wind, to track animals across the plains, and to fight with precision. Each day he trained not just to survive, but to prepare. The pain of his father's death remained in his chest, not as anger, but as purpose. He spoke little, observed everything, and trusted no one lightly. His silence was his armor, his patience his weapon. When he looked at the horizon, he didn't just see the vast grasslands. He saw a world that had turned its back on justice. The tribes fought like wolves, each trying to devour the other. He saw men betray their leaders, brothers turning against brothers, and promises broken as easily as they were made. In that chaos, Temujin saw his mission to bring order where there was none. His father had believed in unity. Now, Temujin would make it reality, even if he had to carve it from stone. The memories of that poisoned cup never left him. He often dreamed of his father's voice telling him to stand tall, to never bow before injustice. Every time the wind howled through the plains, it carried that memory not as sorrow, but as a reminder. He was the son of Yasujay, the heir of a bloodline meant to lead, not perish. His name, Temujin, began to feel heavier, as if it carried not one man's fate, but an entire generation's. The world thought the boy had vanished, swallowed by the cold, but the wilderness that had tried to kill him had unknowingly built him instead. The loneliness had sharpened his focus, and hunger had taught him patience. His soul was tempered like steel in fire. He no longer feared death or defeat. He had already faced both. What remained was the unyielding will of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. By the time Temujin reached manhood, the flame that began as a child's grief had become a storm. His enemies did not yet know his name, but fate was already whispering it across the steppes. The boy who had watched his family suffer would rise again, not as the victim of betrayal, but as the judge of it. The fall of his bloodline had not ended his story. It had only written the first page of a legend that the world would never forget. Years passed, and Temujin's childhood of struggle forged a man of iron will. The wilderness had taught him how to endure, how to wait, and most importantly, how to lead. He began gathering those who had also suffered betrayal and loss. Men who had been abandoned by their tribes, widows who had no homes, and warriors who had grown weary of endless tribal wars. To them, Temujin was more than a man. He was a promise of justice, unity, and vengeance against those who had destroyed everything sacred. He started small, building alliances with neighboring families and forgotten clans, offering not wealth or power, but loyalty and protection. He told them that together they could become stronger than any single tribe. His vision was simple yet revolutionary. No man would betray another for personal gain, and loyalty would be rewarded more than bloodline. These words spread across the steppes like wildfire. For the first time, people who had lived their lives in fear of stronger tribes began to believe they could stand tall again. But with power came resistance. The tribal chiefs who thrived on chaos and division began to see Temujin as a threat. They mocked him, a boy from a fallen family, daring to dream of unity. Yet Temujin did not respond with pride or fury. Instead, he waited and watched, learning their weaknesses. He knew that to unite his people, he would first have to conquer their fear, and nothing conquered fear better than victory. His first battles were small but decisive. With brilliant strategy and fierce determination, he defeated tribes far larger than his own. He used the terrain to his advantage, striking like lightning and vanishing before the enemy could react. His men trusted him completely, for he never asked them to do what he would not do himself. He fought on the front lines, his bow and sword flashing in the chaos. The stories of his victories began to spread, and his name became a symbol of strength and cunning. Every victory brought new warriors to his side. Men who had once been enemies now swore loyalty to him. He treated them with fairness and respect, often sharing spoils equally and ensuring no warrior went hungry. This was unheard of in the old tribal ways where greed ruled. Temujin's leadership wasn't built on fear, it was built on respect. Those who joined him realized they were part of something greater than survival. They were part of a destiny that could reshape the entire steppe. Temujin also changed the way battles were fought. He organized his army into disciplined units, each with clear structure and responsibility. Loyalty was no longer to a clan or a chieftain, but to the mission itself. This made his forces unstoppable. Where other tribes crumbled under confusion, his soldiers moved like a single body. His strategies outmatched even the most seasoned warlords, and his enemies began to whisper that the spirits of the steppes fought beside him. Yet for Temujin, war was not about destruction, it was about creation. Every conquest was a step toward building a new world, one where betrayal would be punished and loyalty would define greatness. He sought justice, not cruelty. Those who surrendered were spared, and those who joined him were welcomed as equals. It was this balance of mercy and strength that made him not just a conqueror, but a leader destined for something far greater than revenge alone. But the road to unity was not without blood. Some tribes refused his call for peace, clinging to their arrogance. Temujin crushed them decisively, making examples of those who defied his vision. He did not revel in their destruction, but he knew that mercy for the treacherous meant death for the loyal. Each victory made his name echo louder, and each enemy that fell before him became a warning to others. The era of chaos was ending. Soon the once scattered tribes began to gather under one banner. The plains that had been divided by centuries of hatred and greed now trembled under a single command. Temujin, the son of a murdered leader, was no longer just another warlord. He had become a living symbol of destiny. The warriors who rode with him no longer fought for food or survival. They fought for the dream he had planted, a world where no child would suffer the same fate he had endured. The man who had once been abandoned in the cold now stood as the fire that lit the steppe. His vengeance was no longer personal. It had evolved into something divine, justice for every wronged soul and unity for every broken tribe. The blood that had once stained his hands now felt like the ink of history, writing the story of a man who would soon be called by a new name, one that would shake the world. Genghis Khan. The tribes that once mocked Temujin now whispered his name with fear and awe. His victories had changed the balance of the steppes, but his heart still carried the weight of vengeance, not the rage of a man seeking blood, but the cold resolve of one who sought justice for generations. The men who had betrayed his father still lived, ruling their lands with arrogance, thinking the boy they had left to die in the wilderness was long forgotten. Temujin never forgot them. He had waited for the moment when his strength was unshakable and his purpose unstoppable. That moment had come. When the time arrived, he rode not as the lost son of a murdered leader, but as a storm forged by suffering. His army moved across the plains with terrifying precision. Villages that once sneered at his family's name now trembled as his banners appeared on the horizon. Yet Temujin did not act like the vengeful warlords before him. He gave his enemies a choice: surrender and live with honor, or resist and be swept away by fate. This wasn't cruelty, it was justice in a world that had forgotten what justice meant. The tribe that had poisoned his father was among the first to fall under his campaign. Temujin didn't sneak in the shadows or strike from behind. He faced them openly, declaring who he was and why he had come. "I am the son of Yesujay," he said before the battle began, "and I have come for what was stolen, not gold or power, but honor." Those words carried across the field like thunder. His warriors, inspired by his calm fury, fought with the strength of men who believed they were rewriting destiny itself. The battle was brutal, but swift. Temujin's disciplined army outmaneuvered the chaotic tribesmen easily. His cavalry, trained in perfect coordination, struck like blades of wind. When the dust cleared, the tribe that had once destroyed his family was no more. But Temujin did not celebrate. He walked among the fallen, his eyes cold but steady. This was not satisfaction, it was the completion of a vow. He had avenged his father, but more importantly, he had proven that betrayal could no longer rule the steppes. After the battle, Temujin gathered his generals and spoke not of conquest, but of order. He declared that no tribe would again rise by deceit, and no leader would prosper through treachery. He created laws simple but unbreakable that bound his people in unity. Even the conquered were allowed to live if they swore loyalty to this new code. For the first time in generations, justice was not a dream whispered by the weak. It was enforced by a leader strong enough to defend it. His vengeance, once personal, now became the foundation of a new world. Every man who joined him swore not just to Temujin, but to the principle he stood for, loyalty above blood, truth above fear. The people began to see him differently, not just as a warrior or conqueror, but as a deliverer. They spoke of him in fireside tales as the man who had taken the pain of his youth and turned it into a weapon that forged peace. Yet peace did not come easily. Other tribes rose in defiance, seeing his growing power as a threat to their traditions. Temujin met them all with the same resolve. He never fought for revenge alone. He fought for the world he was building, one where children would not watch their families destroyed by greed. His armies grew, his banners spread farther, and his enemies began to fall before him like grass under the scythe. With every victory, the blood debt of his past was repaid not in hate, but in transformation. As he rode through lands once torn by endless wars, he saw his people beginning to live without fear. Markets returned, alliances flourished, and tribes that had killed each other for centuries now shared the same fire. The revenge he had once dreamed of was no longer about destroying his enemies. It was about destroying the old world that made betrayal possible. He had avenged not only his father's death, but the pain of an entire generation. The elders of the steppes began to call him the chosen one of destiny. They said the spirits of the ancestors rode with him, guiding his hand. Temujin himself said little, but in his heart he knew this was the path he was born to walk. His father's death had been the spark, but this unity, this justice was the fire that would burn across nations. His vengeance had turned into something greater than he ever imagined, a mission to end the chaos that had plagued his people since time began. And so, as the moon rose over the steppes one night, Temujin stood alone on a hill, the wind carrying the sound of peace across lands that had once known only war. He closed his eyes, remembering the boy who had buried his father, the mother who had whispered of survival, and the oath he had sworn to himself. The circle of vengeance was complete, but the journey of destiny had only just begun. The legend of Temujin's rise spread far beyond the Mongol steppes. Word of a leader who punished betrayal and rewarded loyalty reached even the distant lands of the Silk Road. Men who once laughed at the thought of a united Mongolia began to fear it. For the first time, the scattered tribes of the steppes saw themselves not as enemies, but as one people under a single banner. Yet Temujin knew that unity built on fear alone would not last. If he wanted to build something eternal, he had to bind his people with more than war. He had to build a system of loyalty and justice stronger than the sword. He began by transforming his army into something the world had never seen before. Every soldier, whether born a noble or a herdsman, was equal in rank unless his actions proved otherwise. Merit, not birth, determined honor. He reorganized his army into groups of 10, 100,000, and 10,000, each with a trusted leader. This structure erased tribal lines. A man from one clan could fight beside another without rivalry, because now they were brothers under the same rule. It was a revolution of discipline and unity, born from the chaos of his youth. Temujin also knew that information was power. He built networks of scouts and messengers who could move faster than any army, carrying orders across vast distances in record time. His intelligence system became the eyes of his empire. He knew the movements of his enemies before they even drew their swords. It was this foresight, this combination of discipline, loyalty, and planning, that turned his warriors into a force that felt unstoppable. But behind every great power lies a great test, and Temujin's came from within. Some of his oldest allies began to grow jealous of his influence. They whispered that he had grown too powerful, that the boy who once spoke of unity now sought domination. One of his closest friends and blood brothers, Jamaka, turned against him, gathering rival clans to challenge his rule. It was betrayal that cut deeper than any wound. For Temujin, it was a reminder that trust was a weapon that could be used against you. The battle between Temujin and Jamaka became one of the most defining moments of his life. They had once fought side by side, sworn brothers under the eternal sky, but now they faced each other as enemies. The fighting was fierce, but Temujin's disciplined army outmatched Jamaka's forces. When the dust settled, the man who had once been his brother was captured. Temujin faced a choice: to kill him out of vengeance or to forgive him as a lesson in strength. After a long silence, he ordered that Jamaka be treated with dignity in his final moments. There was no rage in his decision, only sorrow. He had learned that mercy could sometimes be the greatest weapon of all. After the rebellion, Temujin gathered his commanders and declared a new code for all Mongols to follow, the Yasa asterisk, a system of laws based on honor, discipline, and respect. It outlawed theft, betrayal, and deceit among his people. It demanded loyalty to the greater cause above all else. For the first time in history, nomadic tribes that had lived by personal revenge were now bound by a shared moral code. The steppe was no longer ruled by chaos, but by justice, justice that Temujin had forged from the pain of his own past. Under his leadership, trade routes flourished, families prospered, and disputes were settled with fairness rather than bloodshed. Temujin had become more than a conqueror. He was now a ruler with vision. The same man who had been born in exile now ruled the very lands that once rejected him. His people began calling him by a new name, one that reflected not just his power, but his destiny, Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. But even as his name carried across mountains and deserts, Temujin remained grounded in the lessons of his youth. He never forgot the nights of hunger, the betrayal of tribes, or the loneliness of loss. Those memories guided his every decision. When others sought glory, he sought purpose. When they wanted gold, he wanted loyalty. His greatness was not in his conquest alone, but in his understanding that strength without justice meant nothing. The transformation of the Mongol steppes was now complete. Villages that had once feared constant raids now sent tribute willingly, not out of terror but respect. Soldiers who once fought for survival now fought for an empire that gave them meaning. Temujin's power was no longer in his sword, it was in the unity he had created. He had turned enemies into allies, chaos into order, and vengeance into vision. Standing atop the high cliffs overlooking his homeland, Genghis Khan could see far beyond the horizon. He saw not just the lands he had conquered, but the future he was building, one that would echo through centuries. He had avenged his bloodline not by destroying his enemies alone, but by creating a world where loyalty, discipline, and justice would reign long after his death. The man who had once been a hunted child had become the architect of an empire that would reshape the course of human history forever. When Genghis Khan looked beyond the horizon of the Mongol steppes, he saw more than just endless grasslands. He saw a world divided by greed, pride, and corruption. To him, the mission was no longer about uniting the tribes. It was about reshaping the destiny of nations. His vengeance had evolved into something far greater, a crusade against betrayal and tyranny in every form. Across the borders to the south and west lay kingdoms that looked down upon the Mongols as barbarians. They sent insults instead of respect, poison instead of peace. Genghis knew that such arrogance would one day have to be answered. His first major test came when he sought peace with the mighty Khwarezm Empire, a wealthy kingdom that controlled the trade routes between east and west. He sent envoys carrying gifts, silk, and words of friendship, hoping to open a road for trade and diplomacy. But the Khwarezmian governor, blinded by pride, saw only an opportunity to humiliate the Mongols. He murdered the ambassadors and sent back their mutilated bodies, a message meant to show dominance. To Genghis Khan, it was more than an insult. It was betrayal, and betrayal demanded justice. He gathered his generals under the cold stars of the steppe. His eyes were calm, but within them burned the same fire that had guided him since childhood. "They have taken my messengers," he said quietly, "but they have not taken my mercy. They will now see what the hand of justice looks like when patience ends." His army, hardened by years of discipline, prepared for a campaign that would become one of the most astonishing military feats in history. Genghis Khan was no longer fighting for revenge alone. He was enforcing a moral order across the world. The invasion of the Khwarezm Empire began with silence and ended with thunder. His armies moved with speed and precision that stunned even seasoned generals. The Mongol cavalry could cover miles in a single day, striking from unexpected directions. Cities that had thought themselves invincible fell one after another. But unlike ordinary conquerors, Genghis Khan spared those who surrendered peacefully. He punished betrayal, not submission. To him, loyalty, even from a conquered people, was sacred. The message was clear: resist and face destruction, or stand with honor and live under the protection of justice. The Khwarezmian ruler, Shah Muhammad Roman II, fled in panic as his empire crumbled. His betrayal had brought ruin not only upon himself, but upon millions who followed him. When he died alone and hunted, far from his throne, it was as though fate itself had passed judgment. Genghis Khan did not rejoice in the Shah's death. To him it was not vengeance completed, but a lesson fulfilled that arrogance without honor always destroys itself. As his armies marched deeper into foreign lands, stories of his victories spread across continents. To some, he was a monster. To others, a divine instrument of balance. But Genghis Khan never called himself either. He saw himself as a man carrying out the law of consequence, the same law that had shaped his own life. Those who betrayed trust would always face their reckoning, and those who upheld it would thrive under his protection. This philosophy made his empire both feared and respected. Even as he conquered new territories, Genghis Khan imposed discipline among his troops. Looting without permission was punishable by death. Women and children were to be protected. Merchants were to be treated fairly, for trade was the bloodline of civilization. Such rules were unheard of among conquerors. But Genghis Khan knew chaos would destroy everything he built if left unchecked. His vision was not a burning world. It was a world under order, where strength was guided by justice. In every city that fell, he planted seeds of administration, not just ashes. He appointed loyal governors, encouraged religious freedom, and built safe routes for travelers and traders. The isolated steppes became the center of the world's greatest network of roads and ideas. From the ruins of betrayal, Genghis Khan was creating a new kind of empire, one that connected East and West under a single code of discipline and law. But his heart, beneath all the triumph, still carried the echoes of his father's death. Every victory reminded him of that boy who once dug roots from the frozen ground to survive. That memory kept him from arrogance. He often told his generals, "I am no god, only a man who has chosen not to forget." This humility, combined with his strength, made him unlike any ruler the world had known. His empire was born not of greed, but of pain transformed into purpose. By the time the dust settled over the lands of Khwarezm, the Mongol Empire stretched farther than any before it. The vengeance that began with the murder of his father had become a movement that reshaped civilizations. Genghis Khan had avenged his bloodline not by destruction alone, but by imposing a new order upon chaos. He had shown the world that betrayal, no matter how powerful, could never defeat the will of a man who turned his pain into destiny. After the fall of the Khwarezm Empire, Genghis Khan stood at the height of his power. From the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, his banners flew over lands that had once been divided by centuries of hatred. Yet, despite his victories, his heart remained restless. He had achieved what no man before him dared dream, but he knew that empires built on conquest alone would fade like smoke. What he wanted now was permanence. He sought to carve his name not just in the dust of battle, but in the hearts of generations to come. The Mongol Empire began to evolve under his vision. Instead of endless war, Genghis Khan turned his gaze toward stability and governance. He sent emissaries to learn from scholars, merchants, and administrators across the conquered lands. He welcomed mathematicians from the Middle East, engineers from China, and doctors from Persia. Knowledge became as valuable to him as the sword. He once told his sons, "An empire can be won by the sword, but it must be ruled by the mind." This marked a transformation in the man who had once lived only for vengeance. He established laws that applied equally to all, from the lowest herdsman to the highest general. These laws protected women, punished theft, and encouraged loyalty. Under his rule, a woman could own property and travel safely under the Mongol banner, something unheard of in most of the world at that time. His justice was swift but balanced. He believed that fear without fairness led only to rebellion. The people who once trembled before his armies now began to respect him as a wise and unyielding ruler. Trade and communication flourished across his vast empire. He built a relay system of riders who could deliver messages across thousands of miles in mere days. For the first time, merchants could travel from China to Persia without fear of being robbed or killed. The Silk Road, once a dangerous path filled with thieves, became a golden thread that connected civilizations. Genghis Khan's name became synonymous with safety, a strange irony for a man who had risen from war and blood. But peace was not without its shadows. Among his sons and generals, ambition began to stir. The empire was vast, and each man wanted his share of glory. Genghis Khan, wise to the dangers of pride, often warned them that disunity would be their undoing. "A single arrow can be broken easily," he would say, "but many arrows bound together cannot." He had learned that lesson as a child among the tribes, and now he tried to pass it on. Yet he knew that power was a dangerous gift, one that could divide even the strongest of families. Despite his strength, age began to weigh upon him. The years of battle, the cold nights on horseback, and the burden of leading millions had left their marks. Yet his spirit remained unbroken. He would still ride with his warriors, inspect his armies, and speak with his people. He wanted them to see that even a ruler was a servant of his nation. To him, leadership was not a throne of gold, but a duty carved in sacrifice. He began preparing his sons for succession, dividing his empire with care and teaching them the principles that had guided his rise: unity, loyalty, and justice. But deep down he feared that after his death his heirs might forget the lessons written in hardship. He reminded them that betrayal had destroyed their ancestors, and that only loyalty could preserve what he had built. To him, his greatest fear was not death, but the return of the chaos he had spent his life erasing. As the years passed, Genghis Khan's empire became a living symbol of transformation. A land that had once known only bloodshed now pulsed with trade, innovation, and stability. His reputation began to change even among his former enemies. Some called him a destroyer, others a lawgiver. He was both the storm that cleared the sky and the builder who rebuilt under it. Every road, every city, and every law bore the mark of his unrelenting will. Despite all the glory surrounding him, he never forgot the past. He often returned to the quiet steppes where his father was buried, riding alone under the open sky. There he would dismount, kneel, and speak softly to the earth. Those moments reminded him that everything, power, fame, conquest, was temporary. Only purpose lived on. The empire he had created was not just for himself, but for the generations that would come after him. In his final years, Genghis Khan looked across the horizon and saw what he had built. An empire that stretched farther than any before it, united under one law and one vision. He had turned betrayal into order, vengeance into justice, and suffering into strength. Though time would one day take his body, his legacy would not fade. The child, who had once been left to die in the cold, had become the man who reshaped the world, not only with his sword, but with his vision of unity carved in the soul of nations. In the final years of his life, Genghis Khan's thoughts turned increasingly toward the question of legacy. He had conquered vast lands, united countless tribes, and forged an empire that stretched farther than the imagination of any ruler before him. Yet he knew that the greatest test was not the taking of lands, but the keeping of them. His sons, though strong and brave, had grown up in the shadow of his power. Each had his own ambitions, his own pride, and his own vision of what the empire should become. Genghis feared that the unity he had fought for so fiercely might crumble once he was gone. He began to observe them closely, watching not only how they fought, but how they led men. He valued wisdom over brute strength, loyalty over loud words. He reminded his sons that his victories were born not from greed, but from necessity, a fight for survival. He urged them to rule with fairness, to see their people not as subjects, but as family. He had learned long ago that fear alone could not hold an empire together. Respect was stronger than chains. In the evenings, he would sit around the campfires with his generals and speak of his youth. He told stories of hunger, betrayal, and exile not to boast, but to remind them of the price that had been paid for every piece of land they now possessed. "You were born into power," he would say, "but I was born into struggle. Never forget which of the two truly shapes a man." His words carried the weight of experience, carved from a life that had known both cruelty and triumph. As the empire expanded, Genghis Khan began to design a system for its future. He divided territories carefully, ensuring that no single heir held too much power. He appointed loyal advisors to guide his sons, men who had proven their loyalty not by flattery, but through years of unwavering service. He believed that balance was essential, that too much strength in one hand would lead to corruption, and too little would invite rebellion. His vision was not just of a Mongol empire, but of a lasting order that could survive generations. Still, he could sense the tension beneath the surface. His sons, raised as warriors, often clashed over decisions and honors. Rivalries whispered in the shadows of the camps, and Genghis knew that once his authority was gone, these whispers could become wars. To him, this was a familiar danger. He had seen tribes destroy themselves over pride. He would often repeat his old saying, "If you wish to destroy a nation, let its sons fight among themselves." It was not just advice, it was a warning drawn from history and pain. Despite the looming threat of division, Genghis never allowed despair to rule him. He believed in discipline and destiny. He taught his sons that a ruler's strength was measured not by how many enemies he defeated, but by how many people he could protect. He often rode with them into the field, even as his age advanced, to show that leadership meant sharing the burdens of those who followed you. His presence inspired awe and unity, the kind that no crown or sword could command. He also sought to prepare his people, not just his family, for life after him. He encouraged his generals and governors to continue his policies of justice, religious tolerance, and trade. He established councils to ensure that no single person could undo his work overnight. To the world, Genghis Khan was a conqueror, but to his own people he was becoming a teacher, one who turned lessons of survival into the laws of empire. There were nights when he would look at the stars above the endless steppe and think of his father, Yesujay, and of the family that had been torn apart when he was still a child. He knew that his power, no matter how great, could not escape the fate of mortality. But what mattered to him most was that his lineage, his people, and his laws would endure. His empire was more than land. It was an idea that even in a world divided by greed and vengeance, unity could bring strength. As illness and age crept upon him, Genghis Khan began to move slower, but his mind remained sharp. He made his final arrangements with precision, ensuring that his death would not lead to chaos. He ordered his burial to be secret, hidden from the world, for he believed no man's grave should become an idol. His humility at the end of life reflected his understanding that even emperors return to dust. Power, he had realized, was temporary, only legacy lived on. In his last days, surrounded by his most trusted companions, he spoke softly of what he hoped for the future. "If my sons remain united," he said, "our name will live for 1,000 years, but if they divide, even the strongest walls will fall." Those who heard him never forgot his words. They were not the commands of a ruler, but the reflections of a man who had seen both the heights of greatness and the depths of betrayal. In that quiet wisdom lay the true strength of Genghis Khan, not the conqueror of nations, but the architect of an enduring empire built from the spirit of unity and unbreakable will. When Genghis Khan's final breath left his body, the world seemed to pause. The man who had once united the scattered tribes of the steppe and built an empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea was gone. Yet his shadow remained vast, stretching across continents, shaping kingdoms and changing the course of human history. His death was not the end of his story, it was the beginning of his legend. The Mongol people mourned their leader in silence, burying him in secrecy, as was his wish. No grand monument marked his resting place, only the whisper of the wind over the endless plains. But even without a grave, his name became immortal, carried on the tongues of friend and foe alike. After his passing, his sons and generals gathered under the eternal blue sky, the same heavens he had often called upon before battle. They felt the weight of his absence, but also the strength of his legacy. His teachings, his code, and his vision had been woven into the very fabric of their culture. For the Mongols, Genghis Khan was no longer just a man. He was an idea, an embodiment of courage, unity, and destiny. His successors knew they could not match his genius, but they could carry his banner forward. Under his descendants, the Mongol Empire would grow even larger, reaching Europe, the Middle East, and beyond, proving that the fire he lit would burn long after he was gone. In lands far beyond Mongolia, his name evoked both fear and respect. Some saw him as a ruthless conqueror, others as a visionary who brought order where there had been chaos. His enemies called him a destroyer, but history also remembers him as a builder. The vast empire he created connected distant worlds, linking east and west through trade, diplomacy, and communication. The Silk Road flourished under Mongol protection, allowing merchants, scholars, and travelers to cross safely from China to Europe. In a world once divided by endless wars, Genghis Khan's system brought an unexpected kind of peace, the Pax Mongolica, a time when ideas and cultures began to flow freely across continents. His laws, known as the Yasa, continued to guide his empire. They emphasized loyalty, honesty, and respect for all religions, a rare principle in a world often torn by faith. He had understood that diversity could be a source of strength rather than weakness. By allowing people of different beliefs and traditions to coexist, he ensured that the empire did not collapse under the weight of its own differences. This vision of tolerance would influence generations of rulers who came after him, proving that even the most feared warrior could leave behind a legacy of wisdom. But the true measure of Genghis Khan's legacy lay not only in the size of his empire, but in the transformation he sparked in human civilization. He redefined leadership, not as privilege, but as responsibility. He rose from nothing, a man abandoned and betrayed, and through sheer will, united those who had long been divided. His story became a symbol for all who faced impossible odds, a reminder that greatness often emerges from struggle. Even centuries later, historians and leaders studied his life to understand the art of strategy, discipline, and vision. Yet his empire, vast as it was still made of men, and men are mortal. Over time, divisions began to form among his descendants, just as he had feared. The unity he fought so hard to create started to fracture as ambitions and rivalries grew. But even as the Mongol Empire eventually splintered, its impact remained. The cities they built, the routes they opened, and the systems they established would shape global trade and diplomacy for centuries to come. Genghis Khan's influence reached beyond conquest. It became part of the world's very foundation. In many ways, Genghis Khan became a bridge between worlds, the nomadic and the settled, the East and the West, the ancient and the modern. His methods of organization, communication, and governance inspired future empires. His postal system connected the farthest corners of his realm, a model for later civilizations. His merit-based leadership, where loyalty and ability mattered more than birth, broke the old traditions of privilege and opened paths for ordinary people to rise by their deeds. He had not only built an empire of land, but one of opportunity. Generations later, the Mongols still spoke of him with reverence. His name was uttered before battles, his teachings quoted by leaders. Legends grew around him, stories that painted him as larger than life, a man chosen by destiny itself. Across the plains of Mongolia, the spirit of Genghis Khan lived on in every rider, every warrior, every child who dreamed of greatness. His people did not see him as a figure of cruelty, but as the father of their nation, the one who had turned scattered tribes into a single, unstoppable force. As time passed, his story spread beyond the steppes, taking root in the imaginations of people across the world. Writers, poets, and historians debated his legacy. Was he a tyrant or a genius, a destroyer or a unifier? The truth lay somewhere between those extremes. He was both brutal and brilliant, fierce and fair. He embodied the dual nature of power itself, the ability to destroy and to create. In every era, new generations rediscovered his story, finding inspiration in his courage, discipline, and unyielding will. Even today, centuries after his reign, Genghis Khan's name commands awe. His empire may have vanished, but his spirit remains alive in the hearts of those who refuse to be broken by fate. His journey from exile to emperor stands as one of the most extraordinary tales in human history. He was not born into greatness. He earned it through pain, perseverance, and vision. And though his body returned to the earth, the legend of Genghis Khan continues to ride the winds of time, eternal as the steppe he once called home. And when the great Khan finally closed his eyes, the world he had conquered still trembled in his memory. His enemies feared his name, his people whispered it with pride. He had come from nothing, a fatherless child in the cold wind, and left behind an empire that stretched beyond the horizon. His revenge was not just for his bloodline, but for every soul that dared to rise above their fate. Centuries may have passed, but his spirit still rides the winds of history, fierce, unstoppable, eternal. If this story inspired you, subscribe now and stay with us, because the past is not just history, it's a mirror of what greatness truly costs.